Thank you for coming to my wonderfully optimistic titled talk. I will be doing questions at the end, so hopefully I'll get through this sort of quick enough to do that, and then you can catch me around afterwards as well. Always sort of happy to talk to you. So, who am I, and is it really that bad? Well, my name's Jon Cartwright. I've been in the games industry for 30-something years, horrific amount of time, really. So I started way back when we made games on cassette tapes, and somehow I'm still here. I've worked at a whole load of companies, done a bunch of stuff, but most recently, for the past 5 years or so, I've been running my own consultancy out of Australia. But I do a whole lot of work over here in New Zealand. I do a lot of stuff with the good folks at Code, and also some individual developers. For the last 3 years, I've been helping out Team 17, looking after production on everything in Australia and New Zealand. So Dredge, Before We Leave, Moving Out 2, Conscript, whole bunch of things there. Also, I am a cat butler. If you have cats, you will understand exactly what that means. So is it really as bad as all that? Is it really the end of the world? Yes, it is, I'm afraid, but I am here to help. So let's take a quick look at the state of the industry. Sorry, let me fix that. Yep, there we are. So look, that's kind of it, really. It is a trash fire right now. I don't know about you, but I certainly didn't have Humble and Annapurna imploding on my bingo sheet of what was going to happen in the games industry in 2024, and yet here we are. Ouch. So, how did we get here? Well, look, I'm talking about indie games here. It's primarily what I work with. I don't really work in the AAA space, and I'm really talking PC and console. I haven't worked on a mobile project in about 10 years, and VR in about 30. So we could talk about like why the games industry is in the state it is, but honestly, it's history. You know, I'm happy to talk about that afterwards, but I don't really want to waste our time in here today about like how the industry got into the mess it is. We'll all just get angry and ranty, and then you'll go out and punch somebody or something, and that's not really what I want you to do today. So I want to talk about, well, what can we do to make the best of the current situation of the industry? So, you know, it is a hugely optimistic talk title, but it really isn't all doom and gloom. Genuinely, I do believe that. And I think indie games are where innovation is right now. And I think it has been for a while. You know, I'm not saying that AAA games aren't good, but there's a lot of sequels out there. It's all getting a bit kind of Marvel-itis, like in the movie industry. And the thing is, the costs and the expectations there are just so different, just massively different. You know, you look in the last year, we've had some really, really high profile games that are good games that have not performed because they haven't met the ridiculous expectations. So, you know, you look at the Justice League game, Concord, huge budgets, massive teams, long schedules, and they didn't hit the mark, and they're considered a failure, and hundreds of people are impacted. It's dreadful. There have been breakout indie games. I mean, you know, Balatro, I'm sure there's lots of people in here who have lost a lot of their lives to that, and for that, that's a bit of a shame. Dredge, Abiotic Factor, Downwell, there are some real breakout indie titles, you know, very creative titles. The revenue isn't the same as AAA, but it doesn't need to be. Smaller budgets are less risky. You know, you spend a lot less on something like Balatro or Dredge or Abiotic Factor than you do on Concord. So even if the revenue's a lot lower, there's still a chance to make profit. There's a chance to grow a company, grow a studio, and you get a fun game out at the end of it. You know, indie games take a lot less time generally, a lot less time to make. And so the money is tied up for a publisher for a lot less. I do have a developer I work with who took 7 years on his game recently, but we'll just put that aside. That's more of an outlier. So publishers seeing return on investment quicker and seeing less risk is really where it's all about. And that's where indie games fit into this mix. So what can you do if you're pitching your indie game? How can you make the best case for you? And for me, it's about maximizing your addressable audience. And when I talk about your addressable audience, that's who can play your game. Is it PlayStation players? Is it PC players? Is it players in different countries? What platforms are you on? What languages are you supporting? The more people that can buy your game, the more people that your game is relevant to, the bigger your market. You're not going to catch all of them. It isn't Pokemon after all, but you've got that chance, to take the game to more and more people. If you solely concentrate on PC owners in Sweden, you're probably not going to do very well. So what can you do to build that? It is about more platforms. I'm a huge advocate of that. It's about more languages. If people can't understand your game, why would they buy it? And then I think there's building your community before you're trying to pitch your game. A few years ago, I would have told you were mad. You didn't need to have a Steam page. You shouldn't be doing marketing. You shouldn't be trying to get wish lists, and that a publisher would want to do all that for you. But times have changed. And you look at it, and all the big indie games are putting a lot of effort into announcing, into having, pushing for wish lists, getting Discords up. And it's about proving that there's an active audience to buy your game. There was an indie game from Australia that I got to board level with a publisher fairly recently. It wasn't asking for a huge amount of money. It was, there were some risks with it. Of course there were, but it was a very, very commercial game. And in the end, the board passed on it because there was no Steam page, and so there was no evidence that there was an audience for that game. So whilst it feels like, hey, you're going to have to do the marketing job before the publisher does the marketing job, that's just kind of how it is now. And if you were in the last talk where Simon Slee was talking about self-publishing and the options there, get onto that as soon as you can. So there's wish lists, obviously, that's the real currency. Any game is going to want to have as many wish lists as possible on Steam before they launch. Other platforms as well, but we all really talk about wish lists on Steam. Discord has become such a thing. You're probably all in dozens of Discords. I know I am. And having that audience and having that engagement, having that way to talk to your players and have them become advocates for you is great at building the market for your game, building the excitement for your game, and making your game more commercial, because that's what all this is about. Social media as well. I know what was Twitter is now a trash fire, but it's still kind of useful. I know I'm seeing a lot of people get a lot out of TikTok in terms of a lot of traction, a lot of followers, so that's worth looking at it as well. And it's starting that almost as early as you can, to be honest. If you can go to a publisher when you're pitching and say, hey, look, we've had 1 million impressions on this TikTok video or whatever, it's like they stand up and they notice because somebody else hasn't done that and you have. Outside of that, it's about reducing the perceived risk of your game. And I'm very deliberate when I say the perceived risk. What the actual risk is one thing, but if somebody sees you as a huge risk, you're a huge risk. So it's about getting head on with all of the sort of pain points, all of the things that a publisher or an investor might be concerned about. And you kind of make yourself a small target. We'll talk about that a bit more as we go through. So I'm a big believer of taking games to more platforms. The more platforms that you can sell on, the better. Absolutely huge. The more platforms, this is part of how you, like your larger addressable audience, taking your game from Steam to PlayStation to Xbox to Switch to wherever it may be. There's a whole bunch of reasons around that. One of the opportunities is around sales. That after your game has launched, you're going to be in the discount cycle. Most of the copies of your game that you sell are going to be on discount. If you're just on Steam, there's a cool-off period between sales. There's different things you can go in. The more platforms you're on, you can be on sale on pretty much any platform at any time. If you're not on sale on Steam, you'll be on sale on PlayStation, you'll be on sale on Xbox, on Switch, wherever it is. And that's just so valuable. Bundles are such a big thing. And I'm not talking about things necessarily like Humble Bundle. I'm talking more about there are opportunities to bundle your game with previous games or with other like-minded games. You see more and more of that on Steam, and it's just another way of trying to sort of get revenue. And that can happen across platforms. It's a great thing to do. For a while, like indie developers kind of saw Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus as the savior. And certainly when those platforms were new, there was quite a lot of money washing around. I know with Apple Arcade as well, I know some developers that got great amounts of money and it was like, great, this is the future. But those are all maturing now, and those platforms are spending far less money than they used to. And it's not just as simple as saying, hey, I'd like an Xbox Game Pass deal. They are far more choosy about what they take and what they're giving, and the restrictions are a lot more in terms of you can't be on PlayStation Plus if you're on Xbox at the same time, all that kind of stuff. So it's worth bearing in mind, but it's not the solution that it was anymore. What there is, and this comes back to the sales, is that like it's all about the long tail. You know, if you look at any publisher's financials, around about 90% is made up of catalogue games. So that's games that are not new. The revenue from new games is 10% or so, and it's great, don't get me wrong, but every publisher is now managing a huge back catalogue, and we all have a Steam pile of shame. Anybody want to put up their hand that doesn't have a Steam pile of shame? Exactly. So we all buy things on discount. We've been conditioned to, but it's where the real meat of your revenue is coming from. So when you're pitching, you actually want to pitch to become a catalogue title. It sort of feels quite weird, but that's where you want to be. That's where the bulk of the revenue is coming from. So why should you go to more platforms? Isn't it going to cost loads of money? And it's like, well, no, it shouldn't. It really shouldn't cost you too much to go to multiple platforms, whether you're doing it or whether you're having a publisher port it. Going to a second platform shouldn't be double the cost. You know, going to a third platform shouldn't be 3 times the cost. You know, so it gets you in front of more people, and then key things like the marketing campaign can reach more users in a single shot if you can do a simultaneous release, you know, because you're marketing to PC, to PlayStation, to Switch, to Xbox, and it's a lot more efficient if you can do that all at once instead of doing individual marketing campaigns. So how do you do it? How do you make it easy, cost effective? What can you do from your point of view? So, and I'm going to offend some people in the room here, and it's like, use a mainstream engine that makes porting easy. I mean, I've used, in the past few years, I've had projects with Unity, with Unreal, even with Game Maker, and I've taken them to every single platform imaginable. The Godot people are going to get upset, and I'm sorry about that, but you know, at the moment, it's a red flag. It is possible to go to consoles with other engines. You know, Balatro used the Love engine, for example, and it's gone to consoles, and of course it's massively successful. But I mean, if a publisher is looking at a game that's in Unity and they're looking at something that it's in Love or Godot, they're probably going to pick the Unity title, just because there is a proven pipeline. There are a whole load of like companies out there that do porting. It doesn't have to be expensive at all, and it's very, very worthwhile doing. So, you know, I've worked with porting teams in Australia, in Poland, all over the world. It happens all the time. So I would beg you to please use a mainstream engine if that's where you want to go. If you're making a PC game that simply can't go anywhere else, you know, that's for you. But the most successful titles now are across multiple platforms. My other big tip is design and build with controller on day one. Even if you're not planning on taking the game to controller, taking it to console, if you build it with a controller from day one, you're just putting yourself in a better position for the future. Not just your controls, but also all of your UI. It's like everything. You know, controller use is on the rise. If you look at the latest Steam stats, it's rising year on year. But outside of that, it's like absolutely it's for console, but then also you've got to think about Steam Deck. You know, Steam Deck, you're not going to see lots of sales specifically on Steam Deck, but it's a mark of prestige. And it's also something, it's aspirational. Players want to see games. They have intentions of buying Steam Deck, and maybe one day you'll be able to buy one in New Zealand. But they want to play it on Steam Deck, so they want to see games that are on Steam Deck because it's seen as a mark of quality, because Valve actually have to sign it off. So it's worth doing for that. But of course, consoles is really, you know, where I talk about with that. So it's easy to talk about it, but I also kind of wanted to give some examples, and I wanted to give some relevant examples that you might have heard of. So my good friends at Balancing Monkey, they did Before We Leave, which I hope you're familiar with. I ended up producing that for Team 17. So originally, the game was on Epic Game Store. They had an exclusive deal. And then just before they were going to take it to Steam, Team 17 got in touch and said, hey, folks, we'd like to take this to Steam with you, and we'd like to take it to consoles. How about it? And thankfully, Sam, Anna, and the team said yes, and I got to work with them. So it launched, the original PC and Mac game launched in 2020. It was done in Unity, which is great, and of course that opened the door to the console ports. It was, however, keyboard and mouse reliant. You know, as a city builder, of course, there's a world of dialogues, there's a world of sliders and click and drag, and they hadn't implemented controller support. However, a few years ago, you know, Team 17 were like, look, we can deal with this. So they signed to publish on Steam, and then also they engaged a porting house to take the game to consoles. Now, annoyingly, I just started working with Team 17, and I'm in Australia, and they'd signed a porting house in the UK, which was really annoying for me, but even more annoying for Balancing Monkey Games because the time difference is hideous. However, they got an Xbox Game Pass deal, and that made it all worthwhile. However, what happened, because there was no controller support in the game, the Team 17 design staff and the porting team had to work out a scheme for how to take all of these mouse actions to a controller and make it work. Balancing Monkey Games, they didn't have the capability in terms of staff. They were still developing the game. They made the smart decision to not engage and do the console ports themselves, but they did sort of have to help us make it happen for consoles. It happened, it worked, we got it out. It was on Xbox Game Pass, it was on PlayStation, it was on Switch. It wasn't a sim ship on all platforms, which was a little bit annoying, but the Game Pass deal kind of smoothed that out and made it worthwhile. But because it wasn't a sim ship on all platforms, the marketing message was somewhat scattered, and that could have been better. So that was a bit of a downside. In today's market, with the trash fire that the industry is, I don't know if that deal would get signed today, even though it's an excellent game. And I think the lesson, I've obviously spoken to the team a lot about it, the lesson they've taken is like, okay, we're gonna build with controller in mind for the next game. The next porting example is Dredge, and that's a very different story. So what we've got here is pretty much best practice, and that's that team all over, really. So they developed Dredge for PC and Switch at the same time from day one, and it absolutely shows. The controls and the UI were controlled, you know, from day one. It just worked. It was absolutely perfect. By developing on Switch, they took that as their minimum spec. So that meant that taking it to other platforms, it was always going to be performant, you know, particularly on the art side. If you have to spend a lot of time remodeling assets to bring it down to Switch, for a start, it's going to look visually compromised, but it's also going to cost money and time. And again, that's going to put a publisher off, or it might just make it more expensive in general. So Black Salt did the Steam, they did the Switch, and they did the GOG SKUs internally. And that made sense. Again, a tiny team that they wanted to learn about doing different platforms, but they didn't want to overstretch themselves. So what we did after the experience that I had with a porting team in the UK, I found a porting team in Australia, and it was a whole lot of an easier process because we were all in pretty much the same time zone. It was all in the same code base. We were all in Discord every day, and it went really pretty smoothly. We managed to sim ship on all titles. Windows 10 came later, but basically it went to pretty much everything you can think of, day and date, and it was identical. I would say most people probably wouldn't realize that Black Salt didn't do all of the SKUs. It was that good. So it maximized the marketing. I mean, let's be honest, Dredge was everywhere. I mean, if you were at the conference last year, your coffee was because of Dredge, you signed in because of Dredge. It has just been phenomenal. But it was a really straightforward port. You know, controller just worked. There were no art changes. The only kind of real like glitches we had a few shader issues between platforms, but that's absolutely not a developer fault. That's just different machines being weird. So really, it was the perfect solution, really, and it's what I would say is absolutely best practice. So which platforms should you choose? Which platforms should you target? I always recommend you target Steam plus all of the consoles, regardless of whether you actually intend to take it there. A publisher's going to know what will make sense for your game. They could say, hey, look, it's not worth taking to PlayStation or Xbox. Well, this is for Steam and Switch. Great, trust them on it. But if there's no reason not to say, hey, I want to take it everywhere. Why wouldn't you? Absolutely no reason. Maximize your addressable players and go for it. Again, a publisher is, they do porting all the time. They've got porting partners that can do it. It doesn't have to be expensive. I can't tell you how much it costs because I'd be giving away secrets, but it's a lot cheaper than you think it is. And then the incremental benefits of selling on those platforms is huge. It's good for you, but it's good for the publisher. Because like whilst the publisher might like you, I hope they like your game, they like money a lot more. And so if they can make money, brilliant, they'll do it. So Switch, Switch has been great for indies. Obviously, things are going to get a little bit muddy with Switch 2 coming out and what happens there. It's not so good for more adult games. And by adult, I mean more mature, not anything racy. Also, online is difficult with Switch. Not impossible, but it's difficult. It adds an extra layer. And then you've got to worry about high fidelity stuff. So if your game is very PC and very high end, you're going to spend time and money trying to get it down onto Switch, and is it actually worth it? So it might not be the platform to target. Outside of Game Pass, my sort of view from what I've seen from sales is that Xbox is a bit marginal. Xbox players will play Call of Duty, they'll play FIFA, whatever it is, and not a lot else. Or they might play some games in Game Pass. But the revenue, the advances from Game Pass are coming down. It's still worth it. If you're porting to other platforms, the incremental cost of going to Xbox isn't much, so it's worth doing it. But just go to JB and it's like, look at how many Xbox games there are on the shelf versus PlayStation and Switch. It tells the story. Xbox is struggling. So if you can make it work, great, but it's not the end of the world if you can't. Xbox Game Pass is an interesting proposition. People think it's, it was the savior, and it's like, oh, great, cool. Part of Xbox Game Pass now, they're very, very keen that games go into the PC Game Pass as well. And this is what trips up a lot of developers, because your Steam build is not your Xbox PC Game Pass build. They are not the same at all. The amount of developers I've spoken to who think it is, and it's like, no, you've got a world of pain coming. You are building a Windows app that's also an Xbox app that does cross-save and has all the achievements. It is not the same thing. So to do it, great, but bear in mind, if you're not doing the Xbox, get the porting company to do it. They will do it gladly. They will do it at the same time. All good. But don't think it's just simple. The other stores, yes, you've got GOG and you've got EGS, and broadly, unless you're getting money from them, you're not going to see a lot of sales there. People like GOG, great. People like EGS. I think people kind of like the free games on EGS, really, don't they? But if you can get a deal, fantastic. Publishers are probably in a better position to get you a deal and get you an MG, basically a minimum guarantee. So a lot of games will go to GOG, they'll go to Epic, because those platforms are paying for them to be on that service. The one thing I would say is, like a dog, GOG and EGS are not just for Christmas, they are for the whole life of your project. If you're doing updates, you are signing yourself to update those on all platforms. You cannot skip GOG or EGS because it's like, we didn't get many sales. So think about it. And again, publishers will advise here. And again, if you're not going to do the GOG and EGS SKUs, hand it over to a porting team and make it their problem and their cost. Make your life easier. Linux and Mac, again, going to offend a lot of folks in here, but it's fan service. The sales are minimal. I know a lot of folks are very, very passionate about Mac, and they will develop on Mac, and that's cool. And if you can get a publisher to take it on Mac as well, great. But again, your sales are just going to be so minimal. If you can afford to do it and you really want to do it, fine, great, go and support your community. But from a commercial point of view, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense, and Linux even less so, unfortunately. So languages is the other part of broadening your addressable player base. So how do you choose which languages you want to support? So the Steam hardware and software survey is look, it's a really good place to start. It's not telling you what language players, it's telling you what language the computer is running in, not what players are playing in. So you kind of have to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. So a lot of people will run Windows in English and then play in Spanish or whatever it is. So it's worth looking into the location as well. So the number one country, of course, is the US. So you've got to consider Latin American Spanish rather than Castilian Spanish. Even if you don't think your game is going to sell much outside the US, if you don't think Brazil is going to be a huge market for you or whatever, LATAM Spanish is spoken in so much of the US, and it's a real value add. And it is subtly different from Castilian Spanish. Again, publishers will be all over this. What I would recommend is that you come up with a list of what you think makes sense as part of your pitch, as part of your due diligence of knowing your market. China is the number 2 language, so you want to consider traditional and simplified Chinese. Of course, that brings in a whole world of font fun, and we're not going to cover that in this talk, thankfully, but it's really worth doing. Even if you can't sell officially in China, and you can't, your first Steam posts are going to be Huan Chinese if you don't list Chinese as a localized language. I've seen it so many times. Look at your competition. Look at the games that you are comparable to on Steam and other platforms, and see what languages they're supporting. Are roguelikes big in Italy? I don't know, but let's find out. If you can talk to developers, most developers will actually talk to you. They're not actually too different from you. And if you say, hey, was it worth doing Spanish? Was it worth doing Italian? Was it worth doing Korean? They'll probably tell you. The other thing to do is to look at your wish lists. Where are your wish lists coming from on Steam? Are you getting a lot of wish lists, from Germany? Cool, okay, great. Make sure German is sort of part of that mix. But it's all a starting point. I always recommend when you're pitching, you come with your list of languages with a reason for having them, and then a publisher or an investor is going to say, well, look, yeah, we think you need to add Brazilian Portuguese, and this is why. But if you go in just thinking that you can launch in English, that you're in a lot of trouble. So, how do you do it? If you haven't localized before, look, it's really not complicated, but you should be building in localization from day one. Everything should be in string tables. You don't want to have anything hard-coded in your game in terms of text. And then it's going to be a whole lot easier to add languages later, whether it's at launch, whether it's like extra languages afterwards. It sounds really simple. It is really simple, but people forget about it. Unity, Unreal, Game Maker, everything has got a method of doing localization, and ignore it at your peril. Font support, you need to support Unicode fonts because you want to be supporting things like Chinese and Japanese and Korean potentially. I have some friends who they have a game that's big in Indonesia, so they've had to support that font, and it's got some interesting grammar rules apparently. But you've got to go where your market is, and you sort of think yourself, if there was a game you wanted to play but it wasn't in English, would you play it? It's why all of your favorite Japanese RPGs don't come to the West, because there's a massive localization job in bringing it into English. So there's things that you need to implement as well in terms of scaling and word wrapping. German words will of course be comedically long from time to time, and that'll present some challenges. And there's a whole load of really weird Japanese punctuation rules that I found out with the game this year that I'd never been aware of before. So there are things to do. There's a whole lot of resources around this, but being prepared for languages is the super, super good thing to do. Whilst you're doing that, also consider other platforms, even if you're not going to do them. All of the different console platforms have different allowable text for different things. Is it like press a button? Is it press the button? Is it press X? Is it press start? Do them all in English for as much as you can, so that then when you get it localized, and then when you go to other platforms, you're covered for everything. I've done so many multiple rounds of localization with developers who thought they could say joystick, and you can't on all platforms. Sometimes it's joypad, sometimes it's controller, and you will fail submission on that. So this is stuff that you can just prepare for before you get too far, and it's really not too tricky. So how much will it cost and how long will it take? So I kind of ran out of time a bit preparing these slides before submitting them. And so this is from a talk I did last year on localization. And I was doing that on Friday the 1st of September. So really what I'm trying to get across here is that localization takes time, and you need to build it into your schedule. Even if you're not paying for it, you need to build in the time. The kind of rule of thumb is you can get about 10,000 words localized a week. And then add a week for questions, setup, things that go wrong. So a typical indie game that I might work with would be something like 30,000 words. So that's going to be 4 weeks of localization. So if that was last year, the first week of September, basically all of September would be getting the text localized. And that's a big chunk of time, and that's just 30,000 words. If you've got more than that, you're blocking out even more time. How much will it cost? I've given the sort of example there, the sort of fairly standard eFigs, plus Brazilian Portuguese, which is really on the rise. simplified and traditional Chinese, Japanese and Korean. That's sort of between 27 and 37,000 US dollars and take about 4 weeks. Now, to a publisher, that's not a problem. They're fine with that, but it's got to be built into your schedule. The stage after that is localization QA, which a publisher will do with you. Indies on their own tend not to, but it's really worth doing. And that's to make sure that the text may be translated correctly, but is it in context? Does it make sense? That's another couple of weeks. And then you're going to do regression. The cost there of localization QA on that example 30,000 words is 20 to 23,000 US dollars in a couple of weeks. My point with this is, if you're in September and you're doing console, you're not launching the same year if you're just localizing a 30,000 word game in September, because you're not going to be done until October. You're not going to realistically going to submit and release before the end of the year. So you've got to build that into your schedule. Publishers will do that for you, but when you're putting together your timeline, you want to take that into account, and you want to be very upfront about your word count and your languages, because they'll calculate. The publishers have calculators for how long it takes, how much it costs, and if you're going in with 250,000 words, they're going to take a deep breath and go, okay. So yeah, if you were 150,000 words, for example, you would be looking at 16 weeks of localization, and that is massive. So the other thing that you can do before you go out pitching in this horrible, horrible time is to build your audience. Again, years ago, I would have told developers, don't bother putting up a Steam page, don't bother doing an announcement. A publisher's going to want to do all of that, and they can start it with a splash. It's all changed. You've got to do it now. Publishers are looking for you to have proven that there is an audience for your game. Because it's so risky, because there are so many games, they want to see that. There was a game I dealt with, they pitched to me in Melbourne last week. They had just launched the Steam page, but they'd been doing great stuff on TikTok. They had 7,000 people in their Discord. I know live games that have less than that, so they are on the right track with that. In terms of like how to deal with like getting wish lists and what have you, look, I have opinions on that, but honestly, look at videos and stuff from Chris Zukowski on how to market a game. He's got some really, really good insights there. I know he did a session with Code recently, so if any of you have access to that, do. It's an entertaining watch. He's a little bit salesman, but it's really, really fantastic advice, because you really want to have as many wish lists as you can. Any publisher, when you go and speak to them, how many wish lists do you have? And you want to have a good number. If it's like, oh, we've got 200, it's like, not good at all. The thing with Discord, you do have to worry about, like, don't make it a time sink. It's very easy to get sort of sucked into it. You need to balance that. And then the same with social media, but overall, you need to be driving people to your Steam page to wish list and to your Discord to engage, so that you can keep people engaged. This developer I spoke to last week, they had really high engagement in their Discord. They had like mini demos they would do every few weeks. They kept the community updated. So they've got a really jazzed community for their game, and hopefully that's going to stand them in good stead now they're looking for publishing money. Demos. Demos are, of course, hugely important. You're not going to pitch to a publisher without a demo, but public demos as well are a great thing to do. Doing user testing, closed testing, open testing, whatever. Again, Chris Zukowski talks about this quite a bit, and it's really worth sort of reading and listening. Your user testing might be at a local meetup. It might be a local, game dev meetup, and you're just getting people to play it. That's great. You're going to see some things. Closed testing, you might do that, have people in a Discord, and you might be looking at, testing certain features. You might be, looking for technical and performance feedback if you're going through an open test. Maybe you're doing it, maybe this is a reason to get people into your Discord server. Join the Discord server, you can get the demo exclusively. You want a way to engage your players. And there's a lot of people will use Itch and Steam for demos. NextFest is a different kettle of fish. NextFest is great, but remember, you can only go in it once. They changed the rules. And that's so you need to work out when the right time to do that is. There was a developer last week in Melbourne I spoke to. They were about to go into Next Fest, and I'm like, why are you doing that? You're not even pitched to publishers yet. And I managed to persuade them not to, because they were going to waste it. If you haven't got at least 7,500 wish lists, you're not going to get any visibility at all with your Next Fest demo, and you are wasting it. They did not have that many. Your demo, you want to have a call to action. You want to have people wish list it. You want to drive people into your Discord. And if you can, you want to be logging analytics. You want to be getting stuff out of your demo rather than just, we got a bunch of players, because you can improve your game as a result. So in terms of the case study locally with demos, Abiotic Factor, they did a whole bunch of them. I spoke to Henry about this recently, and they started with the closed beta with 50 people. And you look through to like November 2023, and they had 60,000 people come through the game, which is phenomenal. So they were load testing. They had a whole load of stuff. Again, they did the whole thing of join our Discord, you get access to our demo. So they had engaged players, and that's before they did Next Fest. They logged so much in the way of analytics, and they made changes to the game based on it. The other thing that they did, and I'm a big factor of, is like time-limited demos are great. You don't have to leave it up forever. Have it there for a while, get people to, to use it, get your data out of it, then take it away, put up another one, right? If you're not doing Next Fest, there's nothing to stop you having multiple demos, right? Go into it and get that data and see that you're improving the stats that you need to. So I talked right at the beginning about reducing your perceived risk, and it's perceived versus actual, but they're really not the same. The first impressions last, though. If you're seen as a big risk, you will always be a big risk. It's a very difficult hill to get up and to overcome if you're seen as a risky project. So make yourself a small target. Address your concerns head on. So talk about, we want to take it to all platforms. We're using this engine. We didn't roll it our own. Know your budget as well. Like, what are you actually looking for? I don't like when developers come and say, oh, we've got this version for 100,000, this for 200, and this for 500. It's like, what is your game? Do you know what your game is? Because it sounds like you don't. I'd much prefer you came with like, hey, this is the dream scenario, then let's talk about it. And have answers when you are asked questions, but also admit when you don't know and you'll have to get back to them. Don't try and make something up on the spot. I've seen it done. I've done it myself. I've made that mistake, so you don't have to. Please don't do it. Another thing at the moment with the state of the industry, mechanical games are a whole lot easier to pitch than narrative. Mechanics-led games, it's easier to show somebody relatively quickly. It's easy to prove things out, and people can extrapolate from there what the game is. It's easy to see how something like Overcooked or Moving Out is fun and easy to sell. It's a lot harder to see how Alan Wake is great. How do you do a demo for that? I mean, they didn't have to, but, hopefully you get the point. So I think, focus on the fun, prototype and user test, get your data, and then add narrative later. You can add narrative to a game and make that work later. Narrative-led games, I have nothing against them. They're just trickier to sell. Trying to get, kind of almost need to finish it before you can prove, hey, this is the real thing. This is a good thing. And so it just makes life hard. But, I'm not your real dad. You can make that choice. The other thing is with scope, be realistic about your scope, rein it in, especially if this is your first game, right? It's probably not going to be your magnum opus, and that's fine. And even be aware that even if you do get your game signed, the chances are you're going to have to cut stuff because you didn't know, something went wrong, something took longer, got more expensive. So be aware of it and be ready to do it. I know that it's your baby and you'll be super, super passionate about it, but it's also, it needs, a game that doesn't ship is nothing. A game that ships really is something. It's very, very hard. Also, don't come to me and tell me you're building indie Mass Effect. I've genuinely had this, like in the last year, somebody said, oh, we're building Mass Effect, but we're indies. And I'm like, you are insane. Be careful what you do. You're not building the next Minecraft. Don't compare yourselves to those. Know your place, know your level, and build from there, especially if it's your first game. Don't try to compete with AAA, please. Art style can lead into this. I think, to help you, if you've got an art style that's distinctive, you're going to stand out. It's going to aid the discovery. Like if you see a screenshot of Dredge, for example, it's Dredge, right? If you see a screenshot of Balatro, the chances are, it's Balatro. There is, you don't want to be competing with AAA on art and animation. Again, I am back at the guy who came at me and said, I'm building Mass Effect, but indie, and we're going to have these amazing character models. It's like that's not where you want to spend your budget. You want to spend your budget on the game, and you want to make it as good as possible. But there is a reason why pixel art and kind of PS1 style graphics are big in indie. It's because it's affordable. It will also help you if you port. The schedule and budget, please be clear with it. Put in what you've done in the past, your key achievements, so that you're not looking for full funding. You're looking for completion funding. You've got skin in the game. You've already invested. Have your key milestones, your alpha, beta. Take into account stuff like your localization, time, and be pessimistic on your costs. It's going to cost more than you think. Building contingency and profit. You don't have to tell me like what I've seen a lot of pie charts. It's like, oh, this is what we're spending. I don't care. Does it feel right overall? Good. If we really want more information from the publishing side, we will ask for it. And you've got to set a price point and a release date. Even if you're as vague as we think US $20, Q4 2025. That's the other thing. The only currency that anybody cares about is US dollars. I live in Australia and nobody cares about bluey dollar bucks when I'm talking to them. It's all about US dollars. Be very clear about what you are asking for when you go in. Don't expect them to read your mind. You've got to be direct. How much money do you want in US dollars, please? Don't include money for you to do like a massive amount for you to do marketing. A publisher is not going to give you lots of money when they're going to do the marketing. It's not to say you can't and shouldn't do yours, but don't go, oh, we want $200,000 for marketing. It's like, they're not going to give you that. You can have some of your budget to do your marketing, and you should, but like that's what they're there for. Publishers are not mind readers, and depending on who you talk to, there will be different levels of service. So do you want console porting? You want QA and age ratings? Trust me, you do. Localization, again, please consider your word count. Marketing and PR, you want those. They are not the same thing. And then community and customer support. There are burgeoning micro indie publishers who will do a subset of that and consider whether that's right for you. I think I'm just about on time. So my question to you is, do the horrors still persist, and what else can I tell you? We have a microphone, I think, that's going to go around too, if folks do have questions. We have a question over here. Wait for the microphone so everybody can hear you, and it will make it to the recording as well.
Just about the demos and stuff. So I'm expecting that we have to put a demo forward when we're asking publishers and things.
Yep.
What's sort of a general expectation there? Because the demo could be in any state. Is it sort of a shippable demo, or is it could be early beta, late alpha, or?
How do you want to couch it? I don't think there's anything wrong with if you have a demo that is about, hey, look, we're very pre-alpha and we're looking for feedback. What are you trying to get out of the demo? Make clear what you're trying to get out of the demo. Are you trying to hey, look, we want to get your feedback. Do you find it fun? Do you like it? Whatever, what analytics are you trying to get? Include that in, you wouldn't put anything in NextFest that didn't look like it was releasable. But, ahead of that, I think having sort of placeholder stuff, not a problem, as long as you're very clear so that you set expectations so people don't think, oh, all this blocky stuff, is that what the game's going to look like? That's a bit crap. That won't go well. Got a question at the back just to make you run. We'll get your steps up today.
Hey, John. Just a quick question around wish lists. So you mentioned that even if your game is in English and you've got your Steam page up, to pay attention to wish lists from other languages.
Yes.
But if you haven't actually started doing any localization yet, would you actually get wish lists from other countries?
You'd be surprised. Yeah, you will do. And look at where they're coming from. Because there are folks all over the world that will speak English and will play games in English. But if you're seeing demand from, say, Germany, where there is a high level of English speaking, it kind of tends to show that, okay, if this is a genre that Germany is interested in, then you should really be considering, German as a language. I have another one here.
Hey there, thanks for the great talk, really informative. What's your take on if the market reception or the publisher reception to your game isn't great? Would that suggest your game isn't market viable, or would you say that there is a chance to self-publish?
It depends on what feedback you're getting. A lot of the times publishers won't take a game, like if you're too expensive or if they think that you're too inexperienced or if their slate is full and they just don't have space for you. That might be a reason. If you can, it's difficult, not everybody gives great feedback, but if you can find out why they don't want it, that will help you identify whether there is a market. Part of that you should be trying to find out yourself through doing demos, through doing play testing and seeing if people are engaged with it. So I wouldn't say necessarily, but if you're getting knocked back a lot, maybe there's a problem.
Oh, good answer, thanks.
No worries.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Would you include any localization in the demo, like sort of preemptively to see?
So would I include localization in the demo? Yeah. If you can do it, absolutely. Because again, it's about reaching more players and it's about building your market in, out non-English speaking countries, because who knows where it'll go. If you can do it, it would be great. I know a lot of demos don't, and if you're self-publishing, maybe you can't afford it, but the ideal would be 100% yes. Yeah,
thank you.
Always.
Hey, I'm just wondering, when it comes to launching demos and managing IP, have you got any tips around getting that timing right?
Interesting. I guess it depends on what you're doing with your demo, whether this is a demo ahead of release or whether this is you're just trying to build your market. So, I think you can put demos out kind of anytime, really, as long as again, if you're caveating, this is the state of the game, this is what we're looking for, this is why we're doing the demo, then I don't see that there's an issue with that. I think with NextFest, the rule of thumb is that you do it the NextFest before you're about to release, so that you're building anticipation for your game. There are games that have done it earlier with varying results. Generally, a publisher would, if a publisher is going to put you in NextFest, and most of them will, they're going to want to do it as late as they can to your release, so that the NextFest before. So, if you were releasing next month, you would be in NextFest right now. Cool. Thanks. Anything else, or can we release you into the cold? All right, well, thank you very much for having me. Have a great conference.